From the studios of Farm Journal Broadcast, this is AgDay.
Good news about a popular Thanksgiving dish.
It looks like we're going to have a pretty good yield.
The latest on the sweet potato forecast from Louisiana. Concerns grow about the impact on prices after an explosion at a massive ag processing facility in central Illinois. As USDA once again makes cuts to the corn and soybean balance sheet, but not as big as the market expected to see.
A lot of analysts, brokers for that matter, really looking for numbers, to drop a lot more than that.
Reaction and what it means as we head into harvest right now on AgDay.
AgDay, presented by Pioneer. What's next happens when the testing grounds meet the proving grounds. Pioneer. What's next happens here.
Good morning, I'm Clinton Griffiths. As we've seen, crop conditions have continued to decline over the past few weeks. Now USDA is cutting its yield forecast for those crops. The agency, in its latest supply and demand report, once again making cuts to yield forecast. It's now calling for corn yields of 173.8 bushels to the acre. Now, that's down 1.3 bushels from last month, with production now forecast to be 15.1 billion bushels. That's actually up less than 1% from last month, with USDA saying a greater harvested area more than offsets that cut in yield. And that surprised the market. It's also up 10% from last year. Soybeans now forecast to be 50.1 bushels to the acre, which is down slightly less than a bushel from last month. Production, that's now forecast to be 4.1 billion bushels, down 1% from a month ago and down 3% from last year. Checking those ending stocks, both old and new, for corn, old crop at 1.45 billion bushels, still in the bin, about 5 million lower than last month, while new stocks are in at 2.22 billion, slightly higher than last month. Soybean stocks coming in lower from a month ago, with old crop at 250 million and new crop at 220 million. AgDay's Michelle Rook joins us now. And Michelle, a sea of red on the board after the release of the numbers on Tuesday.
Clinton, the September WASDE was a disappointment for the bulls, especially on corn. Now, while USDA did cut yield as expected, they also increased harvested acres, which offset that cut and resulted in an increase in ending stocks. Meanwhile, in soybeans, USDA did tighten the balance sheet, but not as much as the trade had expected. Corn yields dropped in many states as expected, with Illinois and Minnesota down 3 bushels. Nebraska was down 7 bushels, but the 1.3 bushel drop nationally was disappointing.
A lot of analysts, brokers for that matter, really looking for numbers, to drop a lot more than that. And the fact that they didn't, I think, is the biggest problem that we have here today.
And the lower yield was more than offset by higher acreage. USDA incorporated the August FSA data and came up with 800,000 more harvested acres of corn. Seifert says the 591 crop insurance guarantee and some lower input costs in the spring encouraged more corn. So even with a yield cut, production and ending stocks were raised 20 million bushels.
Still well above that 2.2 billion bushel carryover, and that is a problem for corn. And the fact that production went up, yet they didn't do anything to increase demand, well, that just irks, right?
For soybeans, USDA lowered yield about as expected by 0.8 bushels per acre, with a 6 bushel drop in Kansas, 3 in Nebraska, and 4 in Wisconsin. Here they only raised harvested acres by 100,000, resulting in a 60 million bushel drop in production. But ending stocks dropped only 25 million as USDA cut demand.
207 was the average trade guess for carryover on a yield that was slightly higher than what the USDA gave us. So for the fact that that yield came in lower than the trade guess, but they had a carryover at a 220 million bushel carryover instead of like 205, that's the rub. The USDA was able to cut 35 million bushels off of exports. They were able to cut 10 million bushels off of crush.
On wheat, USDA left ending stocks unchanged at 615 million bushels, but lowered world carryover by 7 million metric tons. For cotton, production and ending stocks were lowered on a U.S. and world basis. I'm Michelle Rook reporting for AgDay.
All right, thanks, Michelle. And this month marks 50 years since the first release of the public USDA World Agriculture Supply and Demand Estimates. Before that first release on September 17th, 1973, USDA had been producing the report, but only for internal use.
Markets really started to become very volatile, perhaps largely reflecting the huge grain purchases by Russia the previous year in 1972. And then because of those prices were spiking, I think USDA probably faced some pressure to start releasing these reports, releasing better data to help the markets manage this volatility. It seemed right at the time to start formally releasing this report to the public.
And we have much more about these latest supply-demand report numbers right now over at agweb.com. Michelle will also have more coming up in today's analysis. We have new information about an explosion at ADM's big facility in Decatur, Illinois. The company reporting some operations at the plant are down at this time. ADM releasing a statement saying 5 employees remain in the hospital after being injured in the explosion on Sunday evening. They say the East plant, which produces soybean oil and white flake for soybean protein production, is down right now. It also says a nearby corn processing plant is also temporarily shut down. The company says it's still evaluating the extent of the damage. Now, when fire crews arrived on scene, they reported finding debris scattered over a large area. The cause of that fire hasn't been determined. There's concern a long outage at this massive processing facility could put pressure on crop prices as we go into harvest. We aren't done with Hurricane Lee just yet. The Category 3 storm is posing a growing threat to the U.S. Northeast, Bermuda, and Canada. The storm is currently in the Atlantic and is expected to intensify as it shifts northward. Now, Lee is forecast to pass near Bermuda, bringing strong winds, rain, and high surf to the island later this week. Additionally, it's likely to generate significant waves along the east coast. And finally, the Midwest is getting some much-needed rainfall. Meteorologist Martin Lormore has an update. Martin?
Yeah, a lot of parts of the nation is going to be getting a lot of rain, Clint. Some places that actually really need it, like out toward Texas, where they haven't seen a ton of rain. Some of the first rain that we've seen in several days is going to be falling over the next couple of days. But other places that don't necessarily need it, I'm looking at you, New England. You're expecting upwards to 2-3 inches of rain from Hurricane Lee that is currently right now in the Atlantic. And while it will be weakening, it's still going to be bringing plenty of rain out toward the northerly parts of New England. So expecting several inches of rain, especially as it gets toward that next weekend. Looking at it as a tropical low making its way into the area. And of course, finally, some much needed rain falling in Midland, Texas. The National Weather Service sharing this video saying it's the first measurable rain they've seen since July 1st. I'll have more in your forecast coming up.
Possible damage from Hurricane Lee will be added to the already record-breaking total the U.S. has racked up this year from weather-related catastrophes. The National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration says so far this year, the U.S. has had 23 disasters that cost at least $1 billion each. Now, that passes 2020's previous record of 22 disasters. And NOAA says there's been nearly $58 billion worth of damage, and Hurricane Idalia costs have yet to be tallied. The U.S. Labor Department is proposing a new rule for the H-2A program. It says the proposal would add new protections for worker self-advocacy, better protect workers against retaliation, and make foreign labor recruitment more transparent. Now, the proposed rule would also establish new wage rates apply when they are published in the Federal Register rather than weeks later. Acting Labor Secretary Julie Su saying the proposed rule strengthens protections for H-2A farm workers who are, she says, particularly vulnerable to labor abuses by empowering them to advocate for fair treatment. Now, once the proposed rule is published, it will be open for public comment for 60 days. Meanwhile, just like everything else it seems this year, farm labor expenses are up. The Economic Research Service putting out this chart showing labor costs over the past 2 decades, with labor expenses this year for the ag sector forecast to be more than $43 billion. Now, that would be an increase of about 1.8% over last year's $42.5 billion. It says this year's level would remain below the high set back in 2017. It's estimated for every $100 spent on ag production, almost $10 goes toward labor. Corn and soybean markets were not particularly excited about USDA's latest report. We'll take a closer look coming up in Markets Now. And later, hot, dry weather made for challenging growing conditions in Louisiana. We'll see how the sweet potato crop fared today in the country.
AgDay is brought to you by Endzone from Farm Shop MFG. Rehydrate your soybeans from 10 to 13%. On a 20,000 bushel bin, that's a free semi-load added to your bottom line. What are you waiting for? Call to order your Endzone today.
Soybeans dropped double digits after the release of the latest supply and demand report. Michelle Rook is back with analysis on where things could go next as we move into harvest in markets now.
Grains closed mixed after the WSDA on Tuesday, with row crops lower, the wheat futures to the plus side. Matt Bennett joining us with agmarket.net. And Matt, I guess if you're a bull, you certainly had to be disappointed with what we saw on both corn and soybeans on Tuesday.
Yeah, going into the report, it sure looked like everyone was leaning. It was almost, Michelle, I know there's a lot of conspiracy theorists out there, but markets didn't change much after the report came out. We were lower before the report. Corn, I guess, accelerated moves lower. But bottom line is yields came down. They just didn't come down enough, for what the trade was really hoping to see, at least to turn the tide, if you will. So whenever you look at carryout numbers, it was no surprise to anybody that, carryout for corn was very close to where we were at a month ago, even though we lost some ground on yield. You picked up some harvested acres, and bottom line, that wasn't a shock. I just think people were looking for a little bit lower yield, both corn and beans.
So let's talk about where we go from here now. 2.2 billion bushel carryout on corn. Does that suggest we have to be under 450 corn?
I think a lot of folks might say that, but at the same time, the verdict's still out. I think there's still a great deal of skepticism on, what do we know about the crop? Are we going to know everything we need to know as far as how much damage might have been done over the course of the last month? I mean, some of the areas in the Corn Belt are like 131-year lows as far as how much precipitation they've had over the last 3 to 4 weeks. And so, I think with both corn and beans, the finish is a bit abnormal. And so I think there's some skepticism there. Could we go down to 450 and below? Yeah, absolutely. I think it's possible. But at this stage of the game, I think we might not do so. And if we do, I don't think it'd be very long lived.
What about soybeans? Do we close below $13.50? Do we take out $13 here with the 220 million bushel carryout?
It's tough to think. I mean, a 220, Michelle, is very tight. You're in a situation where another bushel or two drop would put you in extremely tight territory. And it's not hard to fathom you would drop even more after September 1. I mean, bottom line is, you're looking at this bean situation where it's going to be impacted more from weather than what corn is. My personal opinion on this bean deal is that you're probably going to find some support down in here, maybe down in this $13.30 range, but I'm not a sub $13 guy right now.
Thanks for joining us. As always, Matt Bennett with agmarket.net, and we'll have more Ag Day coming up.
To contact Matt Bennett at Ag Market, call 844-4AG-MARKET or visit their website at www.agmarket.net.
A lot of parts of the country is much cooler than they have in the past couple of days. You can look out toward the Midwest. Chicago, high of 67, places even further south. Cincinnati sitting at 77 for that high today, feeling really good. Of course, deep south, still looking pretty warm. New Orleans at 97 and Brownsville 108. Now, we will likely see a lot of these cooler temperatures seeping into the northern parts of the Midwest. Could see lows in the 40s in parts of Michigan. Of course, it's going to remain hot, especially down parts. Actually see that heat. So again, seeing those temperatures in San Antonio in the triple digits. Same goes for Phoenix. It's going to be a bit of a toasty one. The drought monitor is still showing exceptional drought across parts of Louisiana and Texas, especially across parts of the northern plains. Also seeing those drought conditions not exactly looking great. Still as well in the northwest. Also looking at places with severe to extreme drought. But hey, relief is on the way, especially for parts of Texas. We're going to be seeing some of that rainfall making its way across parts of, again, Texas, Oklahoma, may try to seep into parts of Kansas as we get throughout the rest of this week. But we're looking also at Hurricane Lee trying to make a landfall out toward the New England area. Could be bringing several inches of rain, places that don't exactly need it, but there could be up to 2 to 3 inches of rain across that weekend, especially as Lee attempts to make landfall somewhere near that Maine-Canada border. So we're going to be watching it pretty closely as it does make its way into the area and eventually makes its way as a tropical low in toward parts of Newfoundland. And again, several inches of rain could be falling across parts of both Texas and Oklahoma, upwards to hopefully 3 inches of rain. They really need it. Widespread 2 to 3 inches of rain could be expected across parts of New England as well. It's going to be pretty warm in parts of Arkansas, Stuttgart, high of 82, mostly cloudy. Now as we look over at toward Missoula in Montana, temperatures pretty comfy in 77 degrees, mostly cloudy conditions. In Irwin in North Carolina, high 84.
Come rain or shine, we are taking Ag Day on the road as part of our College Roadshow Tour. Now be sure to join us tomorrow at Purdue University in West Lafayette, Indiana for the taping. We'll be talking about the big research projects underway involving the College of Agriculture and talk with a panel of ag professors. Now that starts at 10:30 Eastern Time at the Purina Pavilion on campus. Then watch Ag Day Friday morning for College Roadshow at Purdue University. Ag exports overall may be slow, but pork exports remain strong. We'll have the numbers coming up next. And later, it's harvest season in Louisiana as sweet potatoes roll in. A look at the results in the country.
Your next piece of equipment is on MachineryPete.com. Search equipment from dealerships across the country to find what you're looking for. Only on MachineryPete.com.
New numbers show some good news when it comes to pork exports. They continue to outpace last year's levels. The U.S. Meat Export Federation reporting July exports totaled more than 219,000 metric tons. That's up 5% year over year. Export values also increased 1%. Now, Mexico continues to be the top market, and the organization says it is on a record pace, but that's not all.
It's really more broad-based in Latin America than just Mexico. Central America had a very good month from a variety of markets. So as a region, up about 23% in the month of July for Central America. But you look at Canada had a good month. Taiwan and Oceania region with Australia, we've seen large shifts there. Part of it is a shift away from Europe. Part of it is just a rebound in demand.
Through the first 7 months of the year, pork exports were up 13% compared to last year. Researchers say they've uncovered several previously unknown strains of swine flu viruses, and they say they've been circulating unnoticed in one country's pig population for the past 15 years. Scientists from Duke NUS Medical School in Singapore looking into pig populations in Cambodia. Now they say the strains include viruses that were passed by humans to pigs, as well as some with genes originating from as far as North America. Now they collected over 4,000 nasal swabs from pigs in 4 different provinces, finding 72 pigs, or about 2% of the population, tested positive for influenza A virus. They discovered 9 distinct viruses in those groups, at least 7 of which had not been detected for several years. Now, the researchers say more work is needed to understand the threat from these new viruses, including how they will react with human viruses and how easily they can spread. Well, down south, harvest is in full swing. Up next, we'll check on harvest progress for sweet potato farmers following a challenging growing season. Today in the country. Irrigation was a lifeline for most of Louisiana's sweet potato farmers, and as harvest approaches, LSU Ag Center correspondent Craig Gautreaux reports most growers think they have a decent crop.
An excessively hot and dry summer has been taxing for many farmers in Louisiana. Sweet potato farmers have had to rely extensively on irrigation to keep their crop growing, and from some very early returns, it looks like it worked.
Even though we've had a little bit of dry weather and some excessive heat here in the last few months, it looks like we're going to have a pretty good yield.
Gregory says the weather this year will cause most farmers to delay their harvest to give their potatoes a chance to get bigger.
By allowing a few more weeks and a few more days of irrigation, and when we get into the cooler nights, you're going to get more storage root bulking, and it's going to really allow that crop to size up for where the processors want it.
Sweet potato breeder Don Labonte is excited about a new line currently called LA 18-100. It is an early maturing potato, which is something the industry is looking for.
It is a early line. That's something our industry's needed. We have a potato that potentially could be harvested at 90, 95 days instead of 110, 120 days.
Yield is another measuring stick for sweet potatoes, and when compared to Beauregard, an industry standard since the 1980s, 18-100 exceeds it.
For instance, in this particular plot, we're looking at Beauregard total tonnage is about 600 bushels per acre, whereas 18-100 is about 900.
It appears the only negative with 18-100 is that it needs to be harvested early because it tends to continue to grow and could become too large for the fresh market. With the LSU Ag Center, this is Craig Gautreaux reporting.
All right, thanks, Craig. Well, about 52% of the state's crop goes to the processing market. The rest goes to the fresh market. And that's all the time we have this morning. Thanks for watching. From all of us here at AgDay, I'm Clinton Griffiths. Have a great day.